Okay, I want you to do something for me, just for a second. Close your eyes.
All right, they're closed.
Now, I want you to picture a Buddhist monk. Just, just the archetype. The very first image that pops into your head. What do you see?
Okay. I see the robes, that saffron or maybe maroon color.
Mm-hmm.
I see a shaved head. I see someone sitting probably in a full lotus position, maybe in a garden or a temple somewhere. Very serene.
Right, exactly. And what are they doing in that picture?
Meditating.
Yeah.
They're silent, completely still. Maybe there's like a hint of a smile. It's the picture of peace.
Peace. That's the word. Silence, stillness, breath. And if I asked you, or really, if I asked almost anyone on the street what that monk believes in, specifically, about God, what's the answer we always get?
The standard answer is nothing. Or maybe more accurately, that the question itself doesn't really apply. Buddhism is, quote unquote, the atheistic religion. It's not like Christianity or Islam or Judaism. There's no creator God. There's no old man in the sky judging you.
Yeah.
It's a philosophy of mind. It's all about suffering and the cessation of suffering and the void.
Exactly. It's the rational religion, right? That's why it sells so well in the West. It fits so perfectly into a secular, scientific worldview.
Sure.
You can be a CEO in Silicon Valley, not believe in any kind of magic or supernatural stuff, and you can still be a Buddhist because it's mental hygiene. It's a gym for your mind.
That is the PR version of Buddhism. It's absolutely the version you get in the paperback section of any airport bookstore.
But, and this is a huge but, I was going through the source material we got for today. We're looking at a stack of research centered on a very specific, and I have to say a very controversial figure. And frankly, looking at his research, that image of the peaceful atheistic monk, it starts to crack.
Well, it doesn't just crack, it completely shatters.
I mean, I'm reading things here that, to be blunt, look like straight up sorcery. I'm seeing descriptions of rituals in Tibetan Buddhism that actively invoke entities called Tara. I'm seeing incantations, not meditations, incantations that are designed to summon external forces. I'm seeing what looks an awful lot like worship. Active, desperate, please save me worship.
It is a massive cognitive dissonance, isn't it?
It's huge.
On one hand, you have a doctrine that supposedly says there is no self, there is no other, there is no God. But then on the other hand, you have a practice on the ground that says, Almighty Goddess, please protect me from this guy with a sword. The two just don't line up.
Exactly. So the question we're really tackling today isn't just what is Buddhism, it's a little more pointed. Are we being lied to? Or maybe a better way to put it is, has the version of Buddhism we've all been sold been sanitized for our own protection?
We're going to be exploring a hypothesis that our source material calls strategic denial. It's this idea that the atheism of Buddhism might not actually be a core theological truth, but a historical survival strategy.
A survival strategy.
Yeah, a way to stop powerful, hostile empires from basically wiping you off the map.
Wow. Okay, so this is a deep dive into history, geopolitics, and magic. And to guide us through this maze, we are looking at a source that is, well, let's just say he isn't your typical academic historian sitting in an ivory tower.
No, he's certainly not that.
We're analyzing the work and teachings of a man named Osman. He's also known as the blind Muslim yogi. And I have to be honest, when I first saw the credentials in our research stack, my skepticism radar pinged just a little bit. It sounds like a character from a comic book.
It does, but you really have to look past the moniker and just look at the resume, because the resume is heavy. It's really heavy.
It's intense. We're not talking about a theology professor at a podium here. We're talking about a practitioner, a serious one. Osman is a bioenergy healer. The briefing documents we have describe him as operating at a master level. And he makes some very specific, very bold claims about his methods. He talks about utilizing the principles of quantum physics and entanglement.
Which is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Because he's consciously bridging that gap between what we think of as mystical and what we think of as scientific. He isn't just saying, I wave a wand. He's talking about the mechanics of energy.
And then there's the telepathy element. The source claims he has telepathic healing capabilities. Now, usually, this is the point where my brain would just check out. But the source material really emphasizes that he specializes in the heavy stuff.
The really heavy stuff.
Critical care, recovery, terminal illnesses.
Right. So he's not selling crystals for good vibes at a street fair. He's dealing with literal life and death situations. And I think the key here, the thing that gives it all weight, is the timeline. He has been doing this for 50 years.
50 years. That means since the 1970s.
Think about the level of dedication that requires. The source material mentions he attained his first samadhi experience.
Which is what, exactly?
It's a state of intense, non-dualistic concentration. It's basically the absolute peak of meditative absorption.
Okay.
He had his first one at the age of 19.
19. At 19, I was trying to figure out how to do my laundry without shrinking all my jeans. This guy was dissolving his ego into the cosmos.
I think most of us were right there with you. But it really speaks to a kind of prodigious aptitude for this stuff. And his education reflects it. The source says he studied widely schools of thought from the Far East, the Middle East, the West. It even mentions something called Centauran knowledge.
So we have this figure, Osman, a master healer. And what really, really struck me is the intensity of his personal practice. The documents mention that in the past, he used to practice up to 18 hours a day.
18 hours. Let that sink in.
I mean, do the math. What does that leave? 6 hours. That is barely enough time to sleep and eat. It's total immersion.
It is the kind of immersion that breaks down the barriers of normal perception. And even now, he says he still practices a minimum of 8 to 10 hours a day. He uses this phrase. He says it's just to sharpen the sword.
Sharpening the sword. I love that image. It implies that this ability he has to heal, to see these energetic connections, it isn't some gift he was just born with. It's a tool. It's a skill he has to constantly, rigorously hone.
And this is so crucial for you, our listener, to understand. When someone like Osman looks at Buddhism or at Tantra or at history, he isn't reading the text like a lawyer or a scholar. He is looking at the energy of the practice. He knows what it takes energetically to work with a terminal illness. He's been doing critical care for decades.
Right. So when he sees a Tibetan monk chanting to a goddess named Tara, he doesn't just see a quaint cultural ritual.
No.
He recognizes the mechanics of what's happening. He recognizes the energy work. He's probably thinking that is not philosophy. That is a loaded gun. That is a tool for survival.
Exactly. He is looking at the utility of the religion. What does it do?
And speaking of utility, I think it's important we mention how he operates his practice today. Because usually when you hear guru or master healer, you can't help but think of someone trying to start a cult or empty your bank account. But his model is actually really interesting.
It is. He's very clear about the distinction between his mission and his services.
Okay, what's the difference?
His mission is to simplify these ancient sciences. He wants to promote a scientific, results-based approach that anyone can use.
So he offers a lot of stuff for free. The source mentions he has a YouTube channel where he gives extensive advice and a specific 5-minute yoga and meditation program.
Which is great because it democratizes the knowledge. It removes the barrier to entry. You don't have to fly to a monastery for 20 years. You can start with 5 minutes on your phone.
Right. But then for the more serious work, there's a premium tier. He has a Patreon for things like live daily video lessons. And his energy healing service, because it requires that master level intensity and time we talked about, that is a premium service at a premium price.
And he's also very ethical about the medical side of it all.
Yeah.
He states very clearly in the source, "My services are not a replacement for medical treatment."
That's important.
Very. He says they are complementary. They are meant to enhance areas where other medical fields might be lacking.
I have to mention this one detail because it just stuck with me. He references something called a 10-minute anxiety fix that he offers, which costs less than a Starbucks coffee.
It puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? For the price of a latte that makes you jittery, you could fix your anxiety using a protocol developed by someone with 50 years of intense, practical experience.
It's a pretty compelling value proposition. If you are interested in any of that, the source directs everyone to his website, which is yogawellness786.com. But the main point for our discussion today is that this is a man who understands energy, discipline, and the practical application of ancient science on a profound level.
And that is the perfect transition. Because when a man who has spent 50 years sharpening the sword of energy looks at Tibetan Buddhism, he sees something that the average tourist and even the average scholar completely misses.
He sees the theological disconnects. So let's get into the meat of this whole problem of gods in a godless religion.
All right, so let's start with the baseline. If you open any standard textbook on Buddhism, it will tell you that the Buddha was a man, a human being.
Siddhartha Gautama.
Right. He woke up, he saw the nature of suffering, he taught a path to liberation, he was not a god, he did not ask to be worshipped.
The famous quote is, "Be a lamp unto yourself, don't look for answers outside."
Precisely. But then you go to Tibet, you go up into the Himalayas, and what you find is the active vocal invocation of tantric goddesses. Specifically, Osman points to the figure of Tara.
Okay, so who is Tara, for people who aren't familiar?
In the Tantric tradition, Tara is one of the 10 Mahavidyas. Now, we need to unpack that term because it sounds very academic and dusty, but it's actually kind of terrifying.
Okay, unpack it for us.
The Mahavidyas are the great wisdom goddesses,
Mm-hmm.
but they aren't wise in the sense that a librarian is wise. They represent the raw, untamed cosmic forces of the universe.
Like what?
Time, destruction, death, sex, resurrection, the most powerful fundamental energies that govern existence.
And Osman is very careful to emphasize that the worship of Tara isn't just, sitting and quietly thinking about her qualities. It isn't, oh, Tara represents compassion, so I will now meditate on being more compassionate.
No, not at all. Osman is very specific about the language he uses in the source material. He describes calling on, invoking, and using incantations.
Incantations. That's a word that carries a lot of weight. It's not a word you use lightly. You use incantations when you want to change reality.
It's ritual magic. It is the act of reaching out to an external, seemingly separate entity and asking for direct intervention. And these entities, they aren't always the peaceful, smiling types. Osman points out that they have fierce forms.
I've seen the art. If you've ever been to a museum with a good Tibetan or Himalayan section, you know exactly what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. You see these deities with fangs, with bulging bloodshot eyes. They're often wearing necklaces made of severed human heads. They're surrounded by these halos of roaring fire. Exactly. Now take that image, a wrathful, blue-skinned deity dancing on a corpse and wearing a necklace of skulls, and compare it with the mindfulness app on your phone that's telling you to just notice your breath.
It's a completely different universe. There's no connection.
None whatsoever. And Osman brings up the narratives, the stories the culture tells about these deities, which is key. He mentions stories where the goddess Tara actively rescues travelers from robbers and from enemies.
Okay, so let's just apply some simple logic here for a second. If Tara is just a metaphor in my head, if she's just a symbol of my own inner potential for courage, how does a metaphor fight off a robber with a knife?
Precisely. That is the disconnect in a nutshell. A metaphor doesn't intervene in physical reality. A deity does. If you are invoking an external entity to save you from a guy with a sword, you are not practicing an atheistic philosophy. You are practicing theistic protection magic. Period.
So what we have here is this incredible semantic gymnastics competition going on. The practitioners might say to a Westerner, oh no, we're not worshiping, we are simply paying respect. But Osman is asking the very obvious question. If you are chanting incantations to a fierce entity to save your life, isn't that worship? What else would you call it?
It walks like worship. It talks like worship. And it sure as hell looks like worship.
So why the lie? I mean, why the disconnect? Why does the whole world, for the most part, think Buddhism is this purely atheistic philosophy?
Well, this brings us to the absolute core of Osman's argument. And this is where we have to leave the serene temple and go out onto the battlefield. This is the fear and survival hypothesis.
And it forces us to look at the brutal geopolitical history of that region. Osman poses a really provocative question. Is the claim we don't believe in God a relatively modern change driven entirely by fear, specifically the fear of China?
We have to zoom out and look at the map. Tibet has always been this spiritual fortress, right? The roof of the world. But right next door, you have China. And whether you're talking about the ancient emperors or the modern Communist Party, China has always operated on the principles of pragmatism and control. The principles of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Right. Order, stability, pragmatism. Control. Exactly. China is a civilization that, above all, values stability and hierarchy. Now, imagine you are a Chinese general or an imperial magistrate from the emperor's court. You march your army into Tibet to annex it or to bring it under your control. You walk into one of their temples, you're expecting to see, what? Peaceful monks sweeping the floor.
Yeah, maybe some incense burning, some guys meditating quietly, nothing threatening.
Instead, you walk in, and the first thing you see are these massive, terrifying statues of deities with fangs, wearing necklaces of human skulls, surrounded by halos of fire. And the monks aren't sitting in silence. They are chanting loud, rhythmic, powerful incantations to these fearful deities.
Okay, from the perspective of a secular general, or even a Confucian emperor who believes in social harmony, that does not look like religion. That looks like an insurgency.
It looks like they are trying to raise an army of demons. It is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And what do powerful, pragmatic empires do when they are terrified of a local custom?
They crush it. They stamp it out.
They annihilate it. And Osman points out a staggering statistic here from his sources. He claims that Chinese soldiers and armies have killed over 1 million Tibetans over the centuries. And he says this killing was specifically linked to the worship of these fearful deities found in their temples.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand the nuance of that. The persecution wasn't just a generic, we hate your foreign religion. It was, we are terrified of your magic.
That is the implication. The gods were the liability. Worshipping a powerful interventionist goddess like Tara made you a direct threat to the authority of the state. Because if you have a goddess who can save you from an army, you don't really need to bow to the emperor, do you?
No. So, okay, put yourself in the shoes of a Tibetan abbot a few hundred years ago. You see your monasteries are being burned to the ground. You see your people are being slaughtered because of these statues. You see your sacred books being thrown into giant bonfires. What do?
You lie. Or you reframe the narrative. You go to the Chinese general and you say, no, you completely misunderstand. These aren't real gods. We don't believe in God. We are atheists, just like you. These statues, they're just metaphors. They're psychological symbols for inner states. We're harmless philosophers.
Wow. So atheism becomes a shield. It's a form of camouflage. Please don't kill us. We're just a bunch of peaceful philosophers.
Exactly. It is a strategic denial designed for survival. Osman suggests that this whole no-God doctrine might have been heavily emphasized or maybe even manufactured for the sole purpose of sparing their lives and their culture.
It makes so much sense when you frame it like that. It's like hiding the family jewels when you hear burglars breaking into the house, but in this case, the family jewels are your gods.
And you hide them by redefining them. You say, these aren't gods, they're just mind training techniques. Osman points out in his research that this is most visible in what he calls the outreaches of Tibet, the far ends of the culture where it was pushed to the fringes. That's where the survival pressure would have been the most intense.
And I suppose if you say that lie long enough and you teach it to your children to keep them safe, eventually it stops being a conscious lie and it just becomes the doctrine.
Precisely. A few generations down the line, everyone just believes it. We don't believe in God. But the rituals remain. The chanting remains. The statues remain. The paradox remains, hidden in plain sight.
It really reframes the whole peace and love vibe of popular Buddhism, doesn't it? It suggests that the peace wasn't just a spiritual attainment. It was a plea for mercy.
It was a political statement. We are peaceful. Please don't hurt us.
But Osman doesn't just stop at the China-Tibet dynamic. He draws a really powerful parallel to what happened in India. And this is important because, as we all know, the Buddha wasn't Chinese.
No, he was an Indian prince. And historically, Tibet was always considered part of the Indian cultural sphere. The religious DNA, the source code, is Indian.
So Osman looks at what happened to Indian religion, specifically Hindu Tantra, under a completely different pressure. The British Empire.
The British, the Victorians, they definitely had some strong opinions on religion.
They certainly did. And Osman notes that the British viewed the native tantric practices, especially things like animal sacrifice or the worship of the fierce goddess Kali, as barbaric.
It just didn't fit the Victorian mold of what a proper religion should be. It was savage in their eyes. There was blood, sex, death, fire. The stiff upper lip of the British Empire couldn't handle that kind of intensity.
So what happened? Did the British burn the temples and kill the practitioners like the Chinese did?
They used a different kind of pressure, a softer but maybe more insidious pressure. They used shame and mockery and education. And Osman argues that this led to a widespread sanitization of Hinduism.
Sanitized. That's a strong clinical word.
But it's accurate. In order to survive the colonial gaze, to be taken seriously by their new masters, Hindu intellectuals began to shift the emphasis of their own religion. Suddenly, Hinduism became all about vegetarianism. It became about Brahmanism, the high, clean, priestly philosophy. It became about non-dualism.
And the idea that God is only one.
Right. They started promoting a more monotheistic-ish view to align it closer with Western Christian values. The subtext was, see, we're just like you. Really, we believe in one supreme truth. We're not these savages you think we are, worshiping demons in the jungle.
So the Tantra, the fierce, bloody, intense, and maybe most powerful stuff, was suppressed. It was pushed into the shadows, deemed shameful.
Osman's source says it was almost completely eliminated and is only now in recent decades being revived. So the popular version of Hinduism we know today, the clean, palatable yoga studio version, is partially a product of trying to please the British.
So now we have a clear pattern emerging. In India, the religion was sanitized to please the British, and in Tibet, the religion was sanitized to please the Chinese.
The synthesis is almost undeniable. When a powerful military force conquers you, You adapt your religion to make yourself look less threatening to them. You hide your fangs.
You hide your fangs. That's a perfect way to put it.
And this all leads us to what is probably Osman's most controversial assertion. If the atheism is just a defense mechanism, then what was the original reality? What was underneath the camouflage?
This is the part of the deep dive that might upset some purists. Osman asserts that based on all these historical pressures and based on the remnants of tantric practice that still exist, the original Buddha likely believed in a god.
And not just believed in a passive sense. He suggests the Buddha actively practiced worship of the tantric order.
That is a massive statement. It directly challenges pretty much the entire standard Western academic view of Buddhism. It suggests that the philosophy-only Buddha is a historical construct, and the tantric sorcerer Buddha might be closer to the actual truth.
But think about it. If the atheist version was created specifically to stop armies from killing you, why on earth would we assume that's the original version? It seems far more likely to be the adaptation. Osman is basically stripping away the layers of historical paint.
He also points out that this struggle is still ongoing. It's not ancient history. Tibetan culture is still ostracized and under threat today.
He notes in the source material that the only way many lamas are keeping the authentic culture alive is by migrating to the West. The West has ironically become a refuge. They're opening monasteries here in America and Europe because they can't practice freely in their own homeland.
It's a profound irony, isn't it? The West, which fell in love with the atheistic, philosophical version of Buddhism, is now also the primary refuge for the tantric, deity-worshipping version that was purged from the East.
And Osman points out that Tibetan Buddhism is so often cited by scholars as the most authentic source, the most direct lineage. Yet it's the branch that is most heavily laden with all these god elements. So if the most authentic lineage has the most gods, maybe the original tree had gods too.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about the religion. It suggests the entire narrative isn't just about enlightenment. It's about history and war and the desperate act of cultural survival.
It's a stark reminder that religion doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in the real world, and it's subject to the pressures of armies and empires and the very human, very desperate need to protect one's heritage from being erased.
You know, all of this brings me back to Osman himself. We talked at the beginning about his work as a bioenergy healer. We talked about his 50 years of intense experience.
And his mission to simplify the science and make it accessible.
Right. When he looks at this history, I don't think he's just seeing history. I think he is seeing the loss of a technology.
That is a really fascinating way to frame it. A lost technology.
Think about it. If the gods and the goddesses and the incantations were actually advanced practical methods of energy work methods that could heal, protect, maybe even alter reality, and they were hidden or destroyed because of politics, then humanity has lost a technology.
We've lost the software of the human spirit because the hardware of the Chinese army was too powerful and too threatening.
Exactly. And in a way, that's what Osman seems to be trying to bring back, whether it's through his premium healing services for people in critical care.
Which, again, he's very careful to remind us are complementary to modern medicine and are based on his understanding of quantum principles.
Right. Or whether it's through his free YouTube videos where he's teaching the absolute basics to anyone who wants to learn. He's trying to give us the technology back.
And he's trying to do it in an environment that is free from that historical fear. We don't have to hide anymore. We don't have to pretend to be atheists to survive. We can just look at what works.
So let's just do a quick recap of everything we've unpacked today, because it's a lot. We started with the central paradox. Why do supposedly godless Buddhists in Tibet worship fierce goddesses like Tara?
We then explored Osman's core hypothesis that this contradiction is a direct result of centuries of political persecution. The threat from Chinese emperors and later the communist government forced a strategic rebranding of the faith for survival.
We looked at the powerful parallel of how the British Empire suppressed Hindu Tantra, forcing it to become more palatable, more philosophical, and less barbaric to the colonial eye.
And we landed on the most provocative point of all, the possibility that the original Buddha was in fact a theistic tantric practitioner, and that the atheist label that we're so familiar with is a survival strategy that just happened to stick.
It is a lot to process, and I want to leave you, our listeners, with one final provocative thought to chew on.
Go for it.
How much of what we consider to be ancient religious doctrine is actually just political survival strategy? If you remove the external pressure, if the Chinese emperors had never marched into Tibet, if the British had never colonized India, Would we look at a statue of the Buddha today and see a peaceful philosopher? Or would we see a powerful sorcerer?
If that pressure was removed, would Buddhism today look more like the fierce, wild, powerful world of Tantra? Would we all be chanting to goddesses for protection instead of just watching our breath on a meditation cushion? It's a question that really changes how you look at history.
I really want to thank our source for today's deep dive, Osman, the blind Muslim yogi. This was a completely fascinating perspective that we just would not have gotten from a standard textbook.
Absolutely. And just a final reminder of his background, a master-level bioenergy healer with 50 years of practical experience, specializing in telepathic and quantum healing for critical care situations.
If you're at all interested in his work, whether that's the complementary healing services for very serious conditions or just learning from his lifetime of experience, you can visit his website. It's at yogawellness786.com.
And don't forget about all the free resources. He has that 5-minute protocol on his YouTube channel. He's very clear that he wants people to have access to these tools.
And for the more dedicated, there's his Patreon for premium content. And of course, that 10-minute anxiety fix that costs less than a cup of coffee.
Which, considering the price of coffee these days, is an absolute steal.
It really is. Thank you all for listening to this deep dive. We hope it sparked some curiosity and maybe made you look at that little Buddha statue on your shelf a little differently.
Indeed. Always look beneath the surface.
We'll see you on the next one.